All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good
This
morning,
is
Kevin.
Kevin Hunting. How are you, Holly?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. This is Reflection Friday
And
with the Relatable Coaches.
yes,
And we're excited to be here today on this Friday. I just got my second vaccination.
awesome.
So I'm feeling a little loopy, I would say, but
Mm-hmm.
still fully engaged. So I'd love to ask Holly, what would you say for this week was one personal insight
Yeah.
that you've been managing or sort of thinking about?
Yeah. No, those are great. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you look a year older since I saw you last year, right?
That's true. It was my birthday. I mean, I have grown quite a bit. So actually, that is another big thing. It was my birthday yesterday, everybody.
Yes.
So it
Happy
was
birthday.
fun. It was a nice day.
Not
Thank
that
you.
you look older, you just look wiser. You look wiser than last time a week ago. No, and so my insight is again, a lot of these things I think we're going to share aren't rocket science, right? Like it's like not groundbreaking, but it's just these great little reminders that I think are so important. And my
Mhm.
reminder is really, or my aha, my reflection on this week is really to like trust your intuition. And kind of I guess it's twofold. Trust your intuition and then just trust that what you're doing is serving the world. I do a weekly newsletter, sign up for my newsletter at hollykrivo.com. And it goes out Thursday morning. And I did one that was a little more personal to me. It felt a little more vulnerable and it was about women and their body issues and their
Mm.
body, and so I sent it out and I even asked Katie, I was like, is it good? Like it felt, I don't know, it was nothing major. Like it's nothing I wouldn't tell somebody, but it felt a little personal. And so I sent it out within like I sent it out at 6 o'clock Central Time. By like 9 o'clock, I'd have like 3 or 4 messages from women, different shapes, different sizes, different countries, all like that. One was like that message made me cry. The other was like that message gave me the freedom to go do something. And I was like,
Mm.
wow, because I almost didn't do it. I almost did something that felt a little safer. And I was like, oh, well, this resonate with men on my newsletter. And I'm like, who cares? Like it's a good message. So really just to kind of trust yourself and like go. And if it feels a little edgy, like doing that. So that may not be for but that is for everybody, right? We all have moments
Mm-hmm.
where you shared last week your piece around kindness, this calling to like do something, and I think if I would have sat on this topic, I probably would have done it next week or wanted to. So really just like trust your intuition and know that like when you do, that's going to serve other people. Like
Awesome.
kind
That
of,
sounds
it's
amazing. It
interesting.
sounds
It kind of
beautiful. Like
touches
you said,
on.
that you were able to connect with those individuals, and obviously
Mhm.
you felt the effect. You knew the effect of that relationship because they wrote you back, basically telling you
Mhm.
what that meant to them
Yeah.
individually.
And they're like, I feel seen. And you're like, yeah, like it's I don't know a single woman in my life that is not mean to her body.
Mm.
I'm sure there's someone out there. I don't know anybody in some way. So that was my kind of personal, kind of work related as well. What about you?
Say the big one that keeps coming up or came up for me this week was this idea of I was working with a client around the idea of awareness
Mm-hmm.
and her own personal, like again, awareness in relationship to not only the work that she does, but even some of her familial relationships. And um, I think for me, the big point here is that I think sometimes understanding that you have the ability to stop and reflect and be aware of things is something that we take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to just go through a default mode every single day. Most of us are just kind of going through and reacting to things without ever really stopping to think that we do have that power and the ability to stop and say, in this particular situation, how can I build my own self-awareness? Or
Mm-hmm.
what am I taking this to mean? And just it could be a few simple questions in
Yeah.
those moments that I think can provide such perspective that sometimes we don't get because we're just sort of reacting and doing
Mm-hmm.
without ever stopping to think that there's any implications or
Yeah.
and there are because we're so interconnected and our relationships, whether it be work related or
Mm-hmm.
spouse related, if you're married, if you have a spouse or a partner, um, it is all interrelated. And so I think it's funny, like I make it sound like it's something very powerful. I
Mm-hmm.
think awareness, we could do a much better job, and we do this as coaches, but I think in
Right.
general as a society we could do so much more if
Mm-hmm.
people could learn how to understand and stop and reflect on what they're thinking and how those thoughts are creating certain things in their life that may not be helping them, or, actually maybe taking them down what could be a dangerous path.
Well, and I'm curious, and I know we want to keep this short and sweet, so I don't want to get totally into it, but I have my idea. I'm curious what yours is. What do you think the hardest part about awareness is?
I think a lot of times the most challenging piece about awareness is that it really makes each of us, if we're being, again, conscious about it and spending the time, I think having to look at yourself kind of more objectively, like it's almost like you're observing yourself when you have awareness.
Right.
It's not easy sometimes. It can be it can bring up a lot for people, whether it's pain, whether it's sadness or loss, or anxiety. It might bring, it could bring up anxiety for a specific individual based on a situation. And so I think that piece of it is what probably scares a lot of people. And that's why so many of us don't want to go inward and start to reflect on a particular situation that we may find ourselves in. But the beauty is, by doing that, you're able to sort of make sense of and understand the why behind why things maybe keep happening the same way in your life, or why you keep repeating the same types of behaviors that you're like, God, why can't I stop? Or, it's not helping me. This is making my life miserable. So I think that piece, to me, is the most challenging. Is that it's really looking at yourself, and it's not easy. It's not an easy process.
Right. I think for me, it's like the stopping and the even starting to be aware. Right. I think that to me is something like clients really struggle with, because they're like, well, how do I know? And you're like, whew, like until you know, you don't know. And so I think that's the biggest piece. And I still get that, right? Like you get really wrapped up and you're like annoyed with your spouse. And then you're just like, okay, wait, stop. Like what's really going on? So I think for me, it's like that training. And I think it takes a while for all of us to once recognize it and say, stop, I have a different way that I can now respond to the situation. And how do I want to do that consciously when I'm aware of what's going on, not just that emotional, that habit action.
Absolutely.
So, and I mean, we've talked about this. Awareness seems like the easiest, right? You're like, well, yeah, I'm aware. I see that I've got this mug. I see that it's cloudy outside, but it's so hard to really get in and explain. And it's like this most complicated, simple thing, I think, that we work on as coaches.
Right. I mean, I don't know why this image just came to mind, but it's almost like you're getting in the ring with yourself. Yeah. And it's not about beating yourself up. That's not what I mean, but it is about seeing yourself on the other side, right? We can look at ourselves as opponents, or we actually can start to look at ourselves, right, as just who we are and the experiences, collective experiences that you may have had, and be able to understand that person that you're seeing right on the other side of the ring, coming from a place of maybe love and self-care and compassion, is going to serve you so much better than you beating yourself up, even trying to understand that and build the awareness. So I guess that's interesting that it just came to mind, that I was thinking I picture this boxing ring, with yourself against yourself, but
and being strategic about your the way you're approaching.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. And I know we talked about kind of maybe something personally and then with a client, but I mean, just what's another kind of reflection you have for this week? Professional, personal, whatevs.
One reflection I had, and I would love, if people see this on the replay, I would love for people to weigh in, because it's something that I experienced. I mean, it's a sensation, and I'm curious if other people feel this. So I don't know if it's as much as I have these moments where, if I am sort of tapped into, even sitting at my desk, and I sometimes will play music in the background, but if it's a particular song that comes on, or it's like time, there's a time and a place when there's sort of this when everything starts to feel connected, and even feels connected with what I'm doing as for myself, as a professional, as an individual, that there's a sense of deep connection. And again, I guess I'd say it's spiritual, perhaps. It might be spiritual, but it's like a flush or something, and it comes over you and you feel it. And part of me is like, I don't really quite know what I don't know what it is per se, but it happens. And so, and it does sound a little wooey, what the hell are you talking about? But I would just say that I think sometimes if you are sort of letting yourself just kind of be in the moment and connect with the
Mhm.
things around you and not
Mhm.
feel like there's any attachment or judgment in those spaces, maybe that's what it's about, is you're just able to sort of like feel this. I call it like, maybe it's a vibration. I don't know what it is, but
Mhm.
it's, so have you ever had that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think like what's coming to me is like you're in the flow, you're in the zone, like you're kind of just yeah, and that's interesting because like how do you manufacture that more, right? Like how
Yes.
do you,
Or
because it's not all the time, right? Like there's times
no.
like I'll have on my noise canceling headphones, I'll have good music and I'll just be like writing and I'll just like for days. And then like 2 days later, I do the same thing and I'm like stymied. I'm like, ugh. Um, yeah, or I think if you're just outside enjoying the fresh air,
Yeah,
maybe it's a
like
book,
being
it's
in
just that,
nature and just sort of
yeah.
looking in awe at like all this natural beauty that for me sometimes you're like, how do you even explain that all of this exists, right? Like all these
Right.
beautiful creatures and like the colors, and for me, it does take me to a place where you're like literally, it's almost like metaphysical, that you're like, wow,
Mhm.
how this is just beautiful that this all does exist, and that
Yeah.
like so I'm
Yeah.
interested. I'm interested in hearing other people because I had that experience this week, and of course, when I'm
Mhm.
experiencing, it's like you said, Holly. Like I'm like, well, shit. How do I? Can I? How can I go back there? Like, can
Right.
I get back there? But I
Because what
don't.
what
It's not.
what you I'm sorry, but what you were doing at that time, was it anything unique or is it stuff you've kind of done tons of times before?
I don't know if it was unique. I think it was a combination of factors. I mean, it
Yeah, yeah,
was,
yeah, yeah.
feeling that things were falling in place with my coaching practice and,
Mm-hmm.
opportunities. But then also, I would sometimes say that the feeling does feel like a sense of oneness or gratitude and
Mm-hmm.
connection to something where I feel like there is like this interconnectedness that does really exist
Yeah,
if we allow ourselves to be able to go there, right? And
yeah.
I, again, getting there, to your point, is the paradigm. It's like, well, how the hell do you do that more frequently or more often?
Right. Well, it'd
um
be interesting, like if that happened or when that happens again, or somebody's watching, or even myself, like not noticing so much what you're doing, but like
mm,
what are you feeling? Are you
mhm,
aware? Is it gratitude? Is it wonder? Is it like peace? Like what is that feeling that's coming up? Because it may not even be what you're doing. It may just be like you said, you were probably feeling really good about your business. It may have been a great day. You may have got a workout in. You may have woken up with a
mhm.
grateful heart. Like it'd be interesting to identify like what
Music is
is
a
going
huge
on.
component. I can tell you that for
Mm-hmm.
me, music can take me to a place where if I'm just really getting into the like the not only the sound.
Mhm.
So I guess funny, that's energy too, right? Like, I mean, that
Mm.
is, music has
Mhm.
energy, right? It's a vibration that's creating all these sounds. And so,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I think for me, it's, how do you continue to explore that? And then
Yeah.
how can you tap into that more often? Maybe,
Mhm.
I don't know, consciously. Again, I don't know if you can consciously because it just
Yeah.
sort of is a state versus something that feels forced. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, that would be
That's
one thing for
interesting.
me that
That's awesome. Like the Celine Dion music, you jam to Celine Dion, or is that
I
just me? That's just me.
I don't know if it would
Oh.
be Celine Dion, but you're right. I mean, it is a certain artist or song or
Yeah.
just like, so if you're out there, I'd love to hear from you. Like if you're seeing
Yeah.
this on the replay, add your comments and tell me like what do you think that is for you if you experience it, and how do you explain it for yourself?
Yeah. I love that. That's great. Well, I feel a little like more tactical after yours, but this is something I've worked with different clients on, and I use it myself. And this is like so often we have our to-do list, right? Like we
Mm,
have our to-do list. I'm a huge list person. I have been my whole life, probably always will be. But very often do we have like a done list or a
mm,
proud list. And I worked with this on a couple of clients who were like, I feel like I'm doing a lot of stuff every day, but I'm not doing what I say I'm going to do. And I'm like, are you tracking what you're doing? Because then there's a sense of like, oh, I have this full list, I didn't get anything done, and you're like, and then they beat themselves up, and I'm like, but what
mm,
did you do? And they're like, oh, well, I did X, I did Y, I did Z. And you're like, okay, that seems like that's important stuff for you. And not to like not to like have you dump the things you need to do, because we all have stuff, it's not that piece, but it is like life happens, right? You're like, I had these 3 things I wanted to do done for work. Well, your boss dropped a project in your lap. You did all of those. So why are you beating yourself up about this?
mm,
So it's like I've encouraged clients, like, what's your done list? And the other piece of it is it's also, which I really implement, is like, what have you done that day and what are you proud of? Right. Like at the end of the day, I highlight at the top of my note, my journal or my planner, like accomplishments that I've made, progress I've made. And sometimes it's like, I mean, you're a coach, you know, some of the things we do that have a big impact are like, hey, I connected on email with a potential client. Like that's a
Right.
big deal, like, and it's progress. So I will have at the top, and I was working with a client on that yesterday because she's having a really hard time embracing like the positives in her life. Like she just kind of dashes over them. So we're
Mm.
like talking about how do you every day kind of write down what you're proud of, what you've done, and reflect on that. Because I think, you know, to-do list is great, but a done and an accomplishment list really kind of, you look back, you're like, because weeks go by fast, right? Like before you know it, you're like, what did I do all week? And then you look back, you're like, oh yeah, that was Monday, but I did a lot of cool shit on Monday. And Tuesday I had that conversation. And Wednesday, and you look back, you're like, look at me.
Right.
And
I
I
mean, I
think
would
it's
say
really
also
important.
with some clients, I think it's okay to, it's even challenging to do this, because this is when you start to like go to a self-judgment type of place. Is
Uh-huh.
how do you also just feel okay and sort of can feel good, if you will, about maybe sometimes not being as productive
Right.
as you'd like, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's the other side of the coin. Is some days I'm, you know, really highly productive, and most days I am. I mean, most days I'm like you. I think I'm like, I know I want to do X, Y, and Z
Mm-hmm.
today, and I'm very conscious about getting that stuff done within
Mm-hmm.
the hours that I've allocated for myself.
Right.
But I do think that there are moments where, you know, it maybe there's something else going on, and that it's distracting you, or that you really can't focus, or and something that probably needs to be resolved and just looked at. But it's okay to think that that might be something else that's a huge win. It's just being able to like
Totally.
maybe pin down,
Yeah.
wow, you know what, like I'm really feeling, I don't know, I'm really feeling just like uninspired right now. And
Mm-hmm.
it could be something that happened or whatever. And to also not be like, go to a place where you start to, you know, beat yourself up, that you're like, you know, well, you know, here you are, you've totally lost time, you didn't do anything. And you're also feeling uninspired, right?
Mm-hmm.
So which is harder to do. I do think it's harder to do that, but I do love that idea of having a done list, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, did all this. And I think that's
Right.
also a good reminder to always reflect on the where, like, what even got you to where you are today, right?
Yeah.
It may not even be
Right. And that's
today.
like, that's part of it is like, how are you tracking every single day? Cause, and like for me, I'll look back and be like, is that a good use of my time? Cause I'm really trying to be better at not spending my time on stuff that's not moving the needle or bringing me
Hmm.
joy. Right. So that at the end of the day, I can have this energy to show up how I want to show up and enjoy life instead of just doing all this extra stuff. So yeah, I think,
Absolutely.
and like you said, and I'm not here to tell everybody to keep a to-do list, and like this isn't about doing more. It's more about acknowledging what you're doing. Because people, when they
Absolutely.
come to me with that, they're like, I feel like I'm not making any things. I'm like, well, I know you're doing stuff. So what are you doing? And then look at it. Like, is that working for you? If it's not, if you're feeling terrible, like maybe it's time we readjust where your focus is.
Gotcha.
Um,
Makes perfect sense.
but that's been like a fun one. But well, these are
Cool.
super fun to kind of, it's good in the realm of that, like to stop and reflect, like, what have I learned this week? Like, what does that look like for me to take forward?
Absolutely. Well, everyone, if you hear this, any of the messages that you're hearing, or even themes perhaps that are resonating with you and that speak to you in terms of where you're at right now, you can always find us and reach out to us, just direct message us. And we'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you in terms of where it is you are and maybe where it is that you want to go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
everybody have an amazing rest of your Friday and weekend. And if you're seeing this on the replay, put your comments. We want to see your comments. Like,
Mm-hmm.
put your comments down there, and then also let us know if there's any topics that you'd like us to maybe bring into the fold and discuss.
Yeah. And I'd love like, what have, share your reflections too. What are you learning throughout the week? What can we learn from you too? We're not the only ones that are learning things. So let us know what your reflections are for this week.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks, Kevin.
See you next Friday.
Bye.